Before you dive in, imagine this. You're crashing into a world of glowing forests, ancient beings, and machines that hunt anything with a heartbeat. Sounds wild? Buckle up. Welcome to my channel, the world of science fiction. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. The warning klaxon blared through the cramped cockpit of the Nova Lance, its shrill cry piercing Orion Voss's ears as he fought to maintain control of his small exploratory vessel. His hands, slick with sweat, gripped the flight controls with white-knuckled intensity. The ship bucked and shuddered, systems failing in cascading sequences as it plummeted through the atmosphere of an uncharted planet. "Come on, girl," Orion muttered through gritted teeth, his eyes darting between the rapidly declining altitude meter and the flickering holomap that struggled to render the alien landscape rushing up to meet him. Just hold together a little longer. The Nova Lance had been knocked wildly off course by an unexpected solar flare, its delicate navigation systems fried by the intense radiation. Orion had barely managed to angle the ship towards the nearest habitable planet, a decision born of desperation rather than choice. Now, as the ground loomed ever closer, he realized that habitable might have been a generous description. Through the cracked view screen, Orion caught glimpses of a world unlike any he had encountered in his years of deep space exploration. Impossibly tall trees stretched towards twin suns hanging low in a violet sky. Their trunks twisted and pulsed with an inner light, casting an eerie glow across a landscape shrouded in mist. A jarring impact sent Orion slamming against his restraints, stars exploding behind his eyes as his head struck the control panel. The ship caromed off one of the massive tree trunks, spinning wildly as it tore through a canopy of luminescent leaves. Sparks showered from shorting consoles, acrid smoke filling the cockpit as the Nova Lance finally met the ground in a symphony of shrieking metal and splintering wood. For a long moment, all was silent, save for the hiss of escaping coolant and the faint crackle of electrical fires. Orion hung limply in his seat, blood trickling from a gash above his eye. His chest ached with each labored breath, ribs likely cracked from the impact. But he was alive, a fact that seemed almost miraculous given the wreckage surrounding him. With trembling hands, Orion fumbled with the release on his harness. He collapsed to the floor as it gave way, biting back a cry of pain as his injured body protested the movement. Survival training kicked in, overriding the shock and disorientation. He needed to get out of the ship before the fire spread or the fuel cells ruptured. Orion crawled toward the emergency hatch, dragging himself over sparking wires and twisted metal. His fingers found the manual release, and with a grunt of effort, he wrenched it open. A rush of alien air flooded the cockpit, warm, humid, and thick with unfamiliar scents. Orion pulled himself through the opening, tumbling unceremoniously onto soft, spongy ground that seemed to pulse beneath him. For several minutes, he simply lay there, gulping in deep breaths of the strange atmosphere. His lungs burned, but the air was breathable. Small mercies, he thought grimly. Orion's eyes struggled to adjust to the dim light filtering through the canopy above. Everything around him seemed to glow with a faint, ethereal luminescence. Slowly, painfully, Orion pushed himself to his feet. He swayed unsteadily, fighting a wave of nausea as he took in his surroundings. The Nova Lance lay in ruins behind him, a deep furrow carved through the alien forest, marking its violent descent. Ahead stretched an endless expanse of towering trees, their trunks corkscrewing towards the sky in defiance of gravity. The ground beneath his feet was a carpet of moss-like vegetation, each step causing ripples of bioluminescence to spread outward. Well, "Orion," he muttered to himself, wincing as he probed his injuries. "You wanted to make first contact with an alien world. Congratulations." A distant mechanical whine cut through the eerie silence of the forest, sending a chill down Orion's spine. Something was out there, and he doubted it was coming to welcome him. The sound grew louder, more insistent, accompanied by the cracking of branches and the rustle of disturbed foliage. Survival instincts kicking into overdrive, Orion stumbled back towards the wreckage of his ship. He needed supplies, weapons, anything that might give him a fighting chance on this alien world. Ignoring the protests of his battered body, he climbed back into the cockpit, frantically rummaging through storage compartments. His hands closed around the hilt of his vibro knife, its familiar weight offering a small measure of comfort. He shoved emergency rations and a portable med kit into a pack, along with a handful of flares and his personal locator beacon. It was a pitiful arsenal, but it would have to do. As Orion emerged from the wreckage, the mechanical whine crescendoed into a piercing shriek. Through the misty undergrowth, he caught glimpses of metallic forms moving with predatory grace. Red sensor lights pierced the gloom, sweeping back and forth in search patterns. "Shit!" Orion hissed, crouching low behind the twisted remnants of the Nova Lance's wing. Whatever these things were, they didn't seem interested in making friends. He needed to move, to find shelter, and assess his situation. But where? The alien landscape offered no familiar landmarks, no obvious havens. A flash of movement caught Orion's eye. Not the cold precision of the machines, but something organic, fleeting. A figure darting between the massive tree trunks, quick and graceful. Without conscious thought, Orion found himself moving to follow, driven by a desperate need, by Berlinian for any connection in this alien world. He stumbled through the underbrush, each step sending waves of pain through his battered body. The bioluminescent moss beneath his feet pulsed with each impact, leaving a glowing trail in his wake. Orion cursed under his breath, realizing too late that he was marking his own passage for anything that might be hunting him. The mechanical sounds grew more distant as Orion pushed deeper into the forest. The towering trees closed in around him, their twisting trunks creating a maze of shadow and light. He caught another glimpse of movement ahead, a flash of pale blue skin, a ripple of golden hair that seemed to capture the ambient light of the forest. "Wait," Orion called out, his voice hoarse and desperate. "Please, I need help." The figure paused, turning to face him. Orion's breath caught in his throat as he found himself staring into eyes that glowed with an inner light, set in a face that was hauntingly beautiful and undeniably alien. The woman, for despite her otherworldly features, she was unmistakably female, regarded him with a mixture of fear and curiosity. You're not one of them," she said, her voice melodic and tinged with surprise. "What are you?" Orion opened his mouth to respond, but a wave of dizziness washed over him. The adrenaline that had carried him this far began to ebb, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion and the throbbing pain of his injuries. He swayed on his feet, the alien forest swimming before his eyes. I'm lost," he managed to say before the darkness claimed him, and he collapsed to the glowing forest floor. When Orion regained consciousness, he found himself in a dimly lit cavern, its walls smooth and faintly luminescent. He lay on a bed of soft, moss-like vegetation, his injuries tended to with unfamiliar but soothing balms. As his eyes adjusted to the low light, he became aware of hushed mosses nearby. "Mother, he's waking up," a young, excited voice whispered. "Hush, Leah," came the response, the same melodic tones Orion remembered from the forest. "We don't know if he's dangerous." Orion struggled to sit up, biting back a groan as his body protested the movement. I'm not here to hurt anyone," he said, his voice rough with thirst and fatigue. 3 figures emerged from the shadows of the cave, the blue-skinned woman he had encountered in the forest, and 2 younger females who could only be her daughters. Their golden hair seemed to shimmer with its own inner light, casting a soft glow around them. The younger of the 2 children, barely more than a toddler, clung tightly to her mother's leg, regarding Orion with wide, frightened eyes. "Who are you?" the woman asked, her posture tense and protective. "Where did you come from?" Orion took a deep breath, wincing at the pain in his ribs. "My name is Orion Voss. I'm not from this world. My ship crashed after being caught in a solar flare. I didn't mean to come here, I swear." The older of the 2 daughters, her curiosity seemingly outweighing her fear, took a step closer. "You came from the stars?" she asked, wonder evident in her voice. "Lyra, stay back," her mother warned, but there was a flicker of interest in her own eyes. Orion nodded slowly. "Yes, I'm an explorer. My people send ships to distant stars, looking for new worlds and new forms of life. But something went wrong, and now..." He trailed off, the full weight of his situation settling over him. "Now, I'm stranded here, wherever here is." The woman seemed to wrestle with an internal conflict before finally relaxing her defensive posture slightly. "This world is called Aetherium," she said. "I am Naira, and these are my daughters, Leah and Sari." The younger child, Sari, peeked out from behind her mother's leg, her golden eyes wide with a mixture of fear and fascination. "Thank you for helping me," Orion said, genuine gratitude in his voice. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't found me in the forest." Naira's expression darkened. "You would have died," she said bluntly, "either from your injuries or at the hands of the Darax." "Darax?" Orion asked, a chill running down his spine as he remembered the metallic forms he had glimpsed in the forest. Lyra, unable to contain her excitement despite her mother's warnings, burst out. "They're the bad machines. They hunt anything that glows like us." Her skin pulsed with a soft light, as if to emphasize her point. "Lyra," Nira admonished, "but the damage was done," she sighed, fixing Orion with a penetrating gaze. "The Darax were created long ago as weapons of war, but something went wrong. They malfunctioned, turned against their creators. Now they hunt my people, the Velari, and any other life form on Aetherium that emits light." Orion absorbed this information, his mind racing. "And you've been hiding from them? Here in this cave?" Naira nodded, a deep sadness evident in her luminous eyes. "We are among the last of our kind. The Darax have decimated our population. This cave, with its natural dampening properties, is one of the few safe places left." A heavy silence fell over the group, broken only by the soft, rhythmic pulsing of their bioluminescent skin. Orion felt a wave of empathy for these beings, driven to the brink of extinction by malfunctioning machines. It was a cautionary tale he had heard whispered among his own people, the dangers of creating artificial life that could one day turn against its creators. "I want to help," Orion said suddenly, surprising even himself with the conviction in his voice. "I don't know how much use I'll be, but I can't just sit here and do nothing while you're fighting for survival." Naira regarded him skeptically. "And how do you propose to help? You're injured, stranded on a world you don't understand with technology you've never encountered." Orion pushed himself to his feet, ignoring the pain that lanced through his body. I'm an explorer, trained to adapt to new environments and unknown situations. I may not know your world, but I have skills and knowledge that might be useful. And right now, it seems like you need all the help you can get. Lyra's eyes lit up with excitement. Can you teach us about the stars? About your world? Lyra, enough, Nira said sharply, but there was a note of uncertainty in her voice. She turned back to Orion, studying him intently. Why would you risk your life for us? You owe us nothing. Orion met her gaze steadily. Because it's the right thing to do. And because, like it or not, I'm part of this world now. If the Darax win, if they wipe out all life on Ethereum, I die too. We're in this together. For a long moment, Nyra said nothing. Then, slowly, she nodded. Very well, Orion Voss from the stars. We will accept your help. But know this, if you betray us, if you bring harm to my children, there will be nowhere on this world you can hide from me. The threat was clear in her voice, and Orion didn't doubt for a moment that she meant every word. He inclined his head in acknowledgement. I understand. You have my word. I'll do everything in my power to help you and your people. As if to seal the agreement, Lyra stepped forward, her small hand reaching out to touch Orion's arm. Where her fingers made contact, a soft glow spread across his skin, a warm, tingling sensation that seemed to resonate with the very essence of Ethereum itself. Welcome, Star Walker, Lyra said solemnly, using a term Orion suspected held deep significance for her people. May your light shine bright against the darkness. In that moment, standing in a dim cave on an alien world, surrounded by beings that defied his understanding of life itself, Orion felt a profound shift in his perception. He was no longer just an explorer, an observer of new worlds and civilizations. He had become something more, a defender, an ally in a desperate struggle for survival. As Nira began to explain more about the Darax and the history of Ethereum, Orion listened intently, his mind already racing with potential strategies and plans. He knew the odds were stacked against them, but looking at Lyra's hopeful face and Sari's timid curiosity, he silently vowed to do whatever it took to ensure their survival. The battle for Ethereum had begun, and Orion Voss, lost explorer from the stars, found himself at its very heart. Over the next few days, Orion threw himself into learning everything he could about Ethereum and the Velari. Nyra, though still cautious, began to open up more, sharing the rich history and culture of her people. The Velari, he learned, had once been a thriving civilization, their cities built in harmony with the bioluminescent forests that covered much of the planet. Our ancestors learned to harness the natural energies of Ethereum, Nira explained one evening, as they sat around a softly glowing crystal that served as both light and heat source. We lived in balance with the world, drawing power from the light within ourselves and the forest around us. Orion, fascinated, leaned in closer. And the Darax, how did they come into being? A shadow passed over Nira's face. They were created during a time of conflict when different factions of our people fought for control of Ethereum's resources. The Darax were meant to be guardians, protectors, but their programming twisted. They began to see all sources of light as threats to be eliminated, including your people, Orion said softly, understanding dawning. Nyra nodded, her luminous skin dimming slightly with sorrow. They turned on us, hunting us relentlessly. Those of us who survived learned to dampen our light, to hide in places like this cave, where the natural minerals mask our energy signatures. As Nira spoke, Lyra had been inching closer to Orion, her curiosity about the off-worlders seemingly insatiable. "What's your world like?" she asked, her eyes wide with wonder. "Are there forests that glow? Do your people shine like we do?" Orion couldn't help but smile at her enthusiasm. "My world is very different from Ethereum," he said. "We have forests, but they don't glow like yours do. And my people, well, we don't shine on the outside, but we like to think we have an inner light of our own. That's why the Daraks haven't attacked you," Lyra exclaimed, proud of her deduction. "Lyra," Nira admonished gently, "let's not overwhelm our guest with questions." Orion, however, found Lyra's curiosity refreshing. "It's all right," he assured Nira. "I'm happy to share what I can about my world. Perhaps by exchanging knowledge we can find new ways to combat the Daraks." This seemed to pique Nira's interest. "What sort of technology does your world possess? Anything that might be effective against machines like the Daraks?" Orion considered the question carefully. "We have advanced robotics and AI, but nothing quite like the Daraks. However, we do have electromagnetic pulse weapons that can disable electronic systems. If we could recreate something similar—" "Impossible," Nira interjected, shaking her head. "We lack the resources and facilities to construct such weapons. Most of our technology was destroyed or corrupted by the Daraks." Orion refused to be discouraged. "Then we work with what we have. Tell me more about how the Daraks operate. There must be weaknesses we can exploit." As Nira began to detail the Daraks' behavior patterns and known vulnerabilities, Orion's mind raced with possibilities. He thought of the emergency gear from his crashed ship, the natural resources of Ethereum, and the unique abilities of the Velari themselves. Slowly, the outline of a plan began to form. "Nira," he said, interrupting her mid-sentence, "you mentioned that the Daraks are drawn to light sources. What if we could use that against them?" Nira's brow furrowed. "How do you mean?" "A trap," Orion explained, his excitement growing. "We create a powerful light source, something that will draw them in. Then when they're concentrated in one area, we strike." "With what?" Nira asked skeptically. "We have no weapons that can penetrate their armor." Orion grinned. "Not yet, but I have some ideas. Lyra, you said the ground in the forest glows when you step on it, right?" The young Velari nodded enthusiastically. "Yes, it's like the whole forest comes alive under our feet." "And this glow? It's some kind of energy reaction," Orion pressed. Nira nodded slowly, beginning to follow Orion's train of thought. "Yes, the moss converts kinetic energy into light. It's part of Ethereum's natural energy cycle." "Then that's our weapon," Orion declared. "We harness that energy, amplify it somehow, create an overload that will short-circuit the Daraks' systems." For the first time since he'd met her, Nira's face showed a glimmer of hope. It could work, but the risk would be enormous. We'd need to draw a significant number of Daraks to make it worthwhile. "Which means we'd need powerful bait," Orion acknowledged, "something they couldn't resist." A heavy silence fell over the group as the implications sank in. It was Lyra who finally broke it, her voice small but determined. "We could be the bait, me and Mother. We could shine brighter than we ever have before." "Absolutely not," Nira snapped, pulling Lyra close. "I won't risk you like that." Orion understood Nira's fear, but he also saw the resolve in Lyra's eyes. It was a look he recognized from his own reflection countless times during dangerous missions. "It may be our only chance," he said gently, "but we'll need to plan carefully, set up multiple layers of defense and escape routes." Nira looked torn, her protective instincts warring with the desperate need to find a solution. Finally, she turned to Orion, her gaze intense. "If we do this, I need your word that you'll protect my daughters with your life. No matter what happens to me, they must survive." The weight of her words settled on Orion's shoulders like a physical burden. He met her gaze steadily, understanding the immense trust she was placing in him. "You have my word," he said solemnly. "I'll defend them with everything I have." With that vow, the atmosphere in the cave shifted. What had been a temporary alliance born of necessity became something deeper, a shared purpose, a united front against the darkness that threatened to consume Etherium. As they began to plan in earnest, discussing potential locations and gathering the necessary materials, Orion felt a mix of excitement and trepidation. The stakes were impossibly high, the margin for error non-existent. But looking at the determined faces of Naira and Lyra, and even the cautious curiosity in young Kana's eyes, he knew they had to try. For the next several days, Orion and the Velari worked tirelessly to prepare for their daring plan. They ventured out into the bioluminescent forest under the cover of darkness, gathering samples of the energy-converting moss and testing various methods of amplifying its power. Orion's expertise in xenobiology proved invaluable as he helped Naira devise ways to concentrate and store the volatile energy. During one of these excursions, as they crouched in the shadow of a massive twisted tree trunk, Orion found himself working closely with Lyra. The young Velari's enthusiasm was infectious, her quick mind grasping complex concepts with ease. "Like this?" Lyra asked, carefully manipulating a cluster of glowing moss. Under her touch, the light pulsed and grew stronger, responding to some innate connection between the Velari and their world. Orion nodded approvingly. "Exactly. You have a real talent for this, Lyra." The girl beamed at the praise, her skin glowing brighter in response to her emotions. But then her expression grew serious. "Orion," she said hesitantly, "what if this doesn't work? What if we can't stop the Daraks?" The question caught Orion off guard. He had been so focused on the logistics of their plan that he hadn't allowed himself to consider failure. But looking at Lyra's worried face, he knew he owed her honesty. "I don't know," he admitted softly. "But I do know that doing nothing isn't an option. Sometimes just fighting back, showing that we won't give up, that's a victory in itself." Lyra considered this, her brow furrowed in thought. "Mother says our ancestors believed that our inner light was strongest when we faced darkness without fear. That even if our bodies failed, our essence would return to Etherium, making the world brighter." Orion felt a lump form in his throat at the profound wisdom in the child's words. "Your ancestors were very wise," he said, "and I believe they'd be proud of you, Lyra. You're facing this threat with more courage than many adults I've known." The rustling in the undergrowth cut their conversation short. Orion tensed, his hand going to the makeshift weapon at his belt, a vibro knife modified with components from his crashed ship to emit a disruptive frequency, a Gedi against the Darax's sensors. Nira materialized from the shadows, her expression grim. "We need to move," she whispered urgently. "A Darax patrol is approaching from the east." As if on cue, the eerie mechanical whine that haunted Orion's dreams became audible in the distance. They quickly gathered their samples and began to retreat, moving as silently as possible through the luminescent underbrush. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. As they neared the hidden entrance to their cave, a piercing shriek split the air. Orion's blood ran cold as he turned to see a Darak scout unit emerging from the mist. its red sensors locked onto their position. "Run!" Orion shouted, pushing Lyra ahead of him. "Get to the cave." Nira scooped up Sari, who had been trailing behind them, and sprinted for safety. But the Darak was faster, its metallic legs carrying it over the uneven terrain with inhuman speed. Orion knew they wouldn't all make it. Without hesitation, he turned to face the oncoming machine, his modified vibro knife humming to life in his hand. "Go!" he yelled to Nira. "I'll hold it off." "Orion, no!" Lyra cried. But Nera pulled her daughter away, understanding the necessity of Orion's sacrifice. The Darak bore down on Orion, its sleek form a nightmare of gleaming metal and pulsing energy. He could see the weapons embedded in its frame, primed to fire. Time seemed to slow as Orion centered himself, calling upon years of combat training and the desperate will to survive. As the Darak lunged, Orion dove to the side, slashing out with his vibro knife. The blade connected with a screech of metal on metal, sending a shower of sparks into the air. The disruptive frequency caused the machine to stagger. Its sensors momentarily scrambled. Orion pressed his advantage, darting in close to strike at what he hoped were vital components. But the Darak recovered quickly, one of its arms transforming into a vicious blade that nearly took Orion's head off as he ducked. The dance of man versus machine continued. A deadly ballet played out against the backdrop of the glowing forest. Orion's muscles screamed with exertion, his recent injuries making every movement a lesson in agony. But he refused to give in, knowing that each second he bought was another second for Nira and the children to reach safety. Just as Orion felt his strength beginning to fail, a brilliant flash of light erupted behind the Darak. The machine whirled, its sensors overwhelmed by the sudden illumination. Orion squinted through the glare to see Nira standing at the mouth of the cave, her entire body radiating with an intensity he hadn't thought possible. "Now, Orion," she shouted. "Finish it!" With a final surge of adrenaline, Orion plunged his vibro knife into a gap in the Darak's armor, driving it deep into its core. The machine emitted a high-pitched whine, its limbs twitching spasmodically before it collapsed in a heap of inert metal. Orion staggered back, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Nira rushed to his side, supporting him as they hurried into the safety of the cave. As the entrance sealed behind them, Orion sagged against the wall, the full weight of what had just transpired hitting him. That, he panted, was too close. Nira nodded grimly, and it's only the beginning. The Darak's destruction will draw others. We need to accelerate our plans. As if to emphasize her point, a distant chorus of mechanical shrieks echoed through the cave walls. The Daraks were coming, drawn by the death of one of their own. And this time, they would not stop until they had rooted out the source of the disturbance. Orion met Nira's gaze, seeing his own determination reflected in her luminous eyes. "Then we'd better get to work," he said. "It's time to take the fight to them." As they moved deeper into the cave to join Lyra and Sari, Orion felt a shift in the dynamic between himself and Nira. The shared danger, the trust displayed in battle. It had forged a bond between them that transcended their differences. They were no longer reluctant allies, but partners in a desperate struggle for survival. The next few hours were a blur of frantic activity as they put the finishing touches on their plan. Orion worked alongside Nira and Lyra, combining his technical knowledge with their innate understanding of Ethereum's energy. They constructed a series of devices designed to amplify and focus the bioluminescent energy of the forest, creating what they hoped would be an overload, powerful enough to disable multiple Daraks at once. As they worked, Orion couldn't help but marvel at the resilience of the Nimar. Despite the constant threat hanging over them, Lyra's enthusiasm never wavered, and even young Sari contributed in her own way, her tiny hands surprisingly deft at weaving delicate filaments of energy-conducting material. "It's ready," Nira announced finally, holding up a small, pulsing orb that seemed to capture the very essence of Ethereum's forests. "Now we just need to get it to the right location and activate it." Orion nodded, his expression grim, "Which means we need to draw the Darax to us. Are you sure about this, Nyra? Once we start, there's no turning back." Nyra's gaze flickered to her daughters, a mixture of fear and fierce determination in her eyes. "We have no choice. If we don't act now, the Darax will eventually find us here. At least this way, we're choosing the battlefield." "I want to help," Lyra interjected, her young face set in a determined frown. "I can shine bright, too. Draw them in." "Absolutely not," Nira said sharply. "You and Sari will remain hidden. Orion will guard you while I act as the lure." Orion started to protest, but Nira silenced him with a look. "We both know I have the best chance of drawing them in and escaping. Your job is to keep my children safe, no matter what happens." The weight of responsibility settled heavily on Orion's shoulders. He wanted to argue, to insist on taking the most dangerous role himself, but he understood the logic of Nyra's plan, and he had given his word to protect the children. "All right," he agreed reluctantly, "but promise me you'll be careful. Don't take any unnecessary risks." A ghost of a smile flickered across Nira's face. "Since when have any of our risks been unnecessary?" she asked wryly. As they made final preparations, Orion found himself alone with Nira for a moment. The Nimar woman was adjusting her clothing, which had been modified to enhance her natural bioluminescence. In the dim light of the cave, she seemed to glow from within, her beauty otherworldly and haunting. "Nyra," Orion said softly, struggling to find the right words. I want you to know that no matter what happens out there, it's been an honor to fight alongside you. Your courage, your dedication to your children and your world. It's inspired me in ways I can't even express." Nira turned to face him, her luminous eyes searching his face. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, with a grace that took Orion's breath away, she leaned in and pressed her forehead against his. A tingling warmth spread through him at the contact, as if some essence of Nira's inner light was flowing into him. "Among my people," she whispered, "this is how we share strength before facing great danger. May my light guide you in the darkness, Orion Voss." Before Orion could respond, Nira pulled away, her composure restored. "It's time," she said, her voice steady. "Are you ready?" Orion nodded, pushing aside the tumult of emotions her gesture had stirred within him. "Let's end this," he said, "for Ethereum and for your people." With final embraces for Lyra and Sari, they set out into the bioluminescent forest. The plan was daring in its simplicity. Nira would act as a beacon, drawing the Darax to a clearing where Raydan had set up their energy-focusing devices. Once enough of the machines had gathered, they would trigger the overload, hoping to disable as many Darax as possible in one fell swoop. As they neared the chosen location, Nyra turned to Raydan one last time. "Remember," she said urgently, "no matter what happens to me, you must trigger the device when enough Darax have gathered. Promise me, Raydan." Raydan's throat tightened, but he nodded. "I promise," he said hoarsely, "but you'd better come back in one piece. Those girls need you." A sad smile played across Nira's lips. "They'll have you," she said softly. Then, before Radan could protest, she stepped into the clearing and began to glow. It started slowly at first, a soft pulsing that gradually increased in intensity. Radan watched in awe as Nira's entire body became suffused with light, brighter than anything he had seen on Ethereum. She was a beacon of defiance against the encroaching darkness, a star brought to Earth. The response was almost immediate. From all directions came the sound of approaching Daraks, their mechanical shrieks growing louder as they homed in on the brilliant light source. Radan's hand tightened on the trigger mechanism for their makeshift weapon, every instinct screaming at him to call Nira back. But Nira stood her ground, her light growing ever brighter as the first Daraks burst into the clearing. They converged on her position, their sensors clearly overwhelmed by the intensity of her bioluminescence. More and more of the machines poured into the area, forming a seething mass of metal and pulsing energy. Radan's heart pounded in his ears as he waited for the right moment. They needed as many Daraks as possible in range for maximum effect, but with each passing second, the risk to Nira grew. Just as Radan was about to trigger the device, a massive Darax, larger and more heavily armored than the others, burst into the clearing. Its sensors locked onto Nira, and with terrifying speed, it lunged towards her. "Now!" Nira's voice cut through the mechanical cacophony. Strained, but unwavering, Radan slammed his hand down on the trigger. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, with a sound like reality itself tearing apart, a wave of concentrated bioluminescent energy erupted from the hidden devices. The clearing was engulfed in blinding light. Darak screamed and flailed as the energy overloaded their systems. Sparks flew from their metallic bodies, and one by one, they began to fall. But the massive Darax, the one that had been about to reach Nira, seemed less affected. It staggered under the onslaught, but kept moving forward, its weapons priming for a lethal strike. Without thinking, Radan burst from his hiding place. He sprinted towards Nira, his modified vibro knife clutched in his hand. Time seemed to slow as he saw the Darax's weapon begin to glow with deadly energy. "Nira!" Radan shouted, hurling himself at her just as the Darax fired. They crashed to the ground in a tangle of limbs, the heat of the energy blast searing the air above them. Radan rolled to his feet, placing himself between Nira and the looming machine. The Darax, though damaged, raised its weapon for another shot. But before it could fire, a small figure darted out of the underbrush, moving with preternatural speed. "Lyra, no!" Nira cried in horror. But Lyra was beyond hearing. The young Villari's body glowed with an intensity that rivaled her mother's, her face set in a mask of desperate determination. She threw herself at the Darax, her small hands finding purchase on its metallic frame. What happened next defied Radan's understanding of physics. Where Lyra touched the Darax, its metal began to warp and bubble. The machine emitted a high-pitched whine of distress as its systems overloaded, unable to process the pure, unfiltered energy pouring into it. With a final ear-splitting shriek, the Darax exploded in a shower of sparks and twisted metal. Lyra was thrown back by the force of the blast, her small body tumbling across the forest floor. "Lyra!" Nira's anguished cry tore through the sudden silence of the clearing. She scrambled to her daughter's side, gathering the motionless child in her arms. Radan stood frozen for a moment, his mind struggling to process what he had just witnessed. Then, training kicked in. and he rushed to Naira's side, his hands already reaching for the medkit at his belt. "Is she?" He couldn't bring himself to finish the question. Naira's tear-streaked face lifted to meet his gaze, a mix of fear and wonder in her luminous eyes. "She's alive," she whispered. "But her light, it's so dim." Raiden knelt beside them, his medical scanner whirring as he passed it over Lyra's still form. The readings made little sense to him. Velari physiology was so different from anything he had encountered before. But one thing was clear. Lyra's life signs were weak and fading. "We need to get her back to the cave," Raiden said urgently. Whatever she did to that Darax, it drained her energy severely. Nira nodded, cradling Lyra close as she stood. But as they turned to leave, a sound froze them in their tracks. The whine of more Darax patrols approaching fast. "They're coming to investigate," Raiden said grimly. "We'll never make it back to the cave in time." Naira's face hardened with resolve. "Then we make our stand here," she said. "For Lyra, for Sari, for all of Ethereum." As the sounds of approaching Darax grew louder, Raiden and Naira shared a look of grim determination. They had struck a significant blow against their mechanical oppressors, but the war was far from over. With Lyra's life hanging in the balance and more enemies closing in, they prepared for what could be their final battle. Raiden's mind raced, assessing their options. The clearing was littered with the disabled bodies of Darax, victims of their energy overload device. Perhaps there was something they could salvage, some weakness they could exploit. "Naira," he said urgently, "can you generate another energy pulse, something to slow them down?" Naira shook her head, her face etched with exhaustion and worry. "Not without endangering Lyra further. Her energy is so fragile right now. Any disruption could be fatal." Raiden nodded grimly, understanding the impossible choice before them. He scanned the clearing, his gaze falling on the twisted wreckage of the large Darax that Lyra had destroyed. An idea began to form, desperate and dangerous, but possibly their only chance. "Cover me," he said to Nira, already moving towards the fallen machine. "I'm going to try something." As Nira took up a defensive position, cradling Lyra close, Raiden approached the Darax's remains. He could hear the patrol getting closer, the mechanical whine, now accompanied by the sound of vegetation being crushed underfoot. They had minutes at most. Raiden's hands moved with frantic speed, prying open panels and reconnecting circuits. His time on Ethereum had given him some insight into the Darax's inner workings, and now he prayed that knowledge would be enough. "Come on, come on," he muttered, sweat beading on his brow as he worked. Just as the first Darax scout burst into the clearing, Raiden made the final connection. The fallen machine sputtered to life, its systems reactivating in a cascade of flashing lights. "Nira, get down," Raiden shouted, diving for cover. The reactivated Darax energy core, destabilized by Orion's hasty modifications, went critical. A wave of electromagnetic energy pulsed outward, washing over the clearing in a silent tide of destruction. The oncoming Darax staggered and fell, their systems fried by the unexpected attack. For a long moment, silence reigned. Orion cautiously raised his head, scarcely daring to believe their desperate gambit had worked. The clearing was once again littered with inert Darax bodies, the forest around them untouched by the targeted electromagnetic pulse. "Nira," he called out, fear clawing at his throat. "Naira, are you all right?" A soft groan answered him, and Orion scrambled to his feet. He found Nira stirring slowly, her body curled protectively around Lyra. As Orion reached them, Naira's eyes fluttered open, confusion giving way to recognition. "Orion," she said weakly, What happened? We won, Orion said, a disbelieving laugh bubbling up in his chest. At least for now. How's Lyra? Nyra looked down at her daughter, her face a mask of concern. But as they watched, a faint glow began to emanate from Lyra's skin, growing steadily stronger. The young Velari's eyes opened, unfocused at first, then sharpening as she took in her surroundings. Mother? Lyra's voice was barely a whisper. Did we do it? Did we stop the bad machines? Nyra let out a sob of relief, pulling Lyra close. Yes, my brave girl. We did it, thanks to you and Orion. As the small family embraced, Orion felt a wave of emotion wash over him. He had come to this world as a stranger, crashing into their lives, quite literally. Now, watching Nyra and Lyra, he realized that somewhere along the way, he had found a new home, a new purpose. But their victory, hard-won as it was, brought new challenges. The Daraks they had defeated were surely only a fraction of those that still roamed Etherium. And now that they had struck such a significant blow, the machines would redouble their efforts to hunt down the remaining Velari. We should move, Orion said reluctantly, hating to interrupt the moment, but knowing they couldn't afford to linger. There might be more patrols on the way, and we need to get Lyra somewhere safe to recover. Nyra nodded, her face set with renewed determination. You're right, but we can't go back to the cave. It's not safe anymore, not after this. Then where? Orion asked, helping Nyra to her feet as she cradled Lyra in her arms. A thoughtful look crossed Nyra's face. There are old stories, she said slowly, of a place deep in the heart of the forest, a sanctuary where the earliest Velari learned to harness the power of Etherium. If it still exists, it could be the key to turning the tide against the Daraks, Orion finished, understanding dawning. Lyra stirred in her mother's arms, her voice weak but filled with excitement. The luminous core. Mother, is that where we're going? The place from the old songs. Nyra smiled down at her daughter, a mix of pride and worry in her eyes. Yes, little one. If we can find it, it might be our best hope for saving our people and our world. Orion looked out at the bioluminescent forest stretching before them, teeming with unknown dangers and potential allies. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with peril, but for the first time since crash landing on this alien world, he felt a glimmer of true hope. Well then, he said, a determined grin spreading across his face. Let's go find this luminous core. I have a feeling our adventure is just beginning. As they set off into the glowing undergrowth, Orion couldn't help but marvel at the twist of fate that had brought him to this moment. He had come to Etherium as an explorer, seeking new worlds and new forms of life. Now, he found himself a defender, a protector, and perhaps something more, a part of this strange, beautiful, and imperiled world. The journey to the luminous core would be long and dangerous, but Orion knew he wouldn't want to be anywhere else. With Nyra's quiet strength, Lyra's irrepressible spirit, and the bond they had forged in the crucible of battle, he felt ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. As they disappeared into the depths of the forest, the clearing behind them fell silent. The defeated Daraks lay motionless, a testament to the power of determination, ingenuity, and the unbreakable spirit of those fighting for survival. And somewhere, deep in the heart of Etherium, the luminous core awaited, a beacon of hope in a world besieged by darkness. The journey to the luminous core proved to be as perilous as they had anticipated. For days, Orion, Nyra, and Lyra trekked through the ever-shifting landscape of Ethereum, their path illuminated by the soft glow of bioluminescent flora. They moved cautiously, always alert for the telltale whine of Darak patrols. Lyra's recovery was slow but steady. The young Villari's innate connection to Ethereum's energy seemed to be healing her, drawing strength from the very world around them. Her resilience never ceased to amaze Orion, who found himself growing increasingly protective of both Lyra and Naira. As they traveled, Nira shared more of the Villari's history and legends. The luminous core, she explained, was said to be the birthplace of their people's power, a nexus of pure energy at the heart of Ethereum. Our ancestors learned to harness its power, Naira said one evening as they rested in the hollow of a massive gnarled tree. It's said that at the core, a Villari's light can shine bright enough to reshape reality itself. Orion, who had seen firsthand the incredible abilities of the Villari, found himself believing in the legend. "And you think this power could be used against the Daraks?" he asked. Nira nodded, her expression a mix of hope and uncertainty. "If the legends are true, yes. But no one has seen the luminous core in generations. It may be nothing more than a story told to give hope in dark times. Sometimes hope is the most powerful weapon we have," Orion said softly, reaching out to squeeze Naira's hand. The gesture felt natural, a physical manifestation of the bond that had grown between them. Naira's luminous eyes met his, a flicker of something more than friendship passing between them. But before either could speak, Lyra's excited voice cut through the moment. "Look," she cried, pointing to a patch of moss near their feet. "It's changing color." Orion and Naira turned to see the bioluminescent moss shifting from its usual soft blue to a deep, pulsing purple. As they watched, the color change spread outward, racing through the undergrowth like a wave. "What does it mean?" Orion asked, his hand instinctively going to his makeshift weapon. Naira's face was alight with wonder. "It's a sign," she breathed. "The forest is guiding us. We must be getting close to the luminous core." Energized by this development, they pressed on, following the trail of purple light that wound its way through the alien forest. The air grew thick with an electric charge, making the hair on Orion's arms stand on end. He could feel the power thrumming through the ground beneath his feet, a tangible force that seemed to pull them forward. As they pushed through a dense curtain of glowing vines, Orion suddenly found himself on the edge of a vast clearing. He stopped short, his breath catching in his throat at the sight before him. At the center of the clearing stood an immense tree, its trunk wider than any Orion had seen on Ethereum. But it was unlike any tree he could have imagined. Its bark was translucent, pulsing with veins of pure energy that flowed upward into branches that seemed to pierce the very sky. At its base, a pool of liquid light swirled and eddied, giving off a radiance that made Raiden's eyes water. "The luminous core," Nira whispered, her voice filled with awe. "It's real, after all this time." Lyra, her strength seemingly renewed by proximity to the core, squirmed out of her mother's arms. She took a few tentative steps towards the glowing pool, her small form silhouetted against its brilliance. "Lyra, wait," Naira called out, but it was too late. As Lyra's foot touched the edge of the pool, a ripple of energy surged outward. The entire clearing was suddenly awash in light, so bright that Raiden had to shield his eyes. When he could see again, he gasped in amazement. Floating above the pool was a shimmering apparition, a being of pure energy that seemed to shift and flow like water. It regarded them with eyes that held the wisdom of ages. its voice resonating not in their ears, but in their very minds. "Welcome, children of Etherium," the being said, its gaze falling on Naira and Lyra. Then it turned to Raiden, a note of curiosity in its mental voice. "And welcome, Starseeker. Long have we awaited your arrival." Raiden exchanged a startled glance with Naira. You were expecting us?" he asked. The being's form rippled, an approximation of a nod. The coming of the Starseeker was foretold in the oldest songs of Etherium, one who would fall from the sky and help our children reclaim their birthright. Naira stepped forward, her voice trembling with emotion. "Great One, we seek your help. Our people are being hunted to extinction by machines gone rogue. We need the power of the luminous core to defeat them." The being's light dimmed slightly, a sense of sadness emanating from it. "The Darax," it said, "a grave error born of fear and misguided ambition. Their creation upset the balance of Etherium, and now that imbalance threatens all life on this world. Can you help us stop them?" Raiden asked, hope and desperation warring in his voice. The being seemed to consider for a long moment. "The power you seek is not something that can be given," it said finally. "It must be earned through sacrifice and understanding." Before anyone could respond, a familiar mechanical wind cut through the air. Raiden's blood ran cold as he realized what it meant somehow. The Darax had followed them to the sacred grounds of the luminous core. Their approach presented an immediate threat to both the protagonists and the ancient being. Raiden, drawing upon his tactical experience, quickly assessed the situation and began formulating a plan to counter the imminent danger. "We need to establish a defensive perimeter," Raiden stated, his tone calm but authoritative. "Naira, can you use your connection to the core to create an energy barrier?" Naira nodded, her luminous eyes reflecting determination. "I'll attempt to interface with the core's energy. Lyra, stay close to me." As Naira and Lyra positioned themselves near the pool of liquid light, Raiden turned to address the ethereal being. "Great One, we require your assistance. The Darax pose an existential threat to all life on Etherium. Is there a way to neutralize them permanently?" The being's form shimmered, its voice resonating with ancient wisdom. "The Darax, though misguided, are still children of Etherium. True balance cannot be achieved through destruction, but through transformation." This cryptic response prompted Raiden to seek clarification. "Transformation. Please elaborate on how we might accomplish this." Before the being could respond, the first wave of Darax burst into the clearing. Their metallic forms gleamed in the radiant light of the core. Sensors locked onto the gathered group. Naira, her face a mask of concentration, managed to erect a shimmering barrier of energy around the core and its immediate surroundings. The Darax collided with this force field, their weapons discharging harmlessly against its surface. "The barrier won't hold indefinitely," Naira warned, strain evident in her voice. "We need a permanent solution." The being's form pulsed, drawing everyone's attention. "The solution lies within you, children of Etherium and Starseeker. The Darax were born from the fear of losing light. Show them that light cannot be extinguished, only transformed." Raiden processed this information, his mind racing to formulate a plan. "Naira, Lyra, I have an idea. It's risky, but it might be our only chance. We need to channel the core's energy through us and into the Darax." "That amount of power could be fatal," Naira cautioned, her protective instincts flaring. "We don't have a choice," Raiden countered, his voice firm but empathetic. It's our only option for saving Ethereum. With a shared look of understanding, Raiden, Naira, and Lyra joined hands, forming a circuit with the pool of liquid light at its center. The being's form expanded, enveloping them in a cocoon of pure energy. As the Darax breached the failing barrier, time seemed to slow. Raiden felt an overwhelming surge of power course through him, unlike anything he had ever experienced. He saw Naira and Lyra beside him, their forms blazing with inner light. With a collective effort of will, they directed this torrent of energy outward. It struck the advancing Darax like a tidal wave of pure illumination. The machines stopped in their tracks, their metal bodies beginning to shift and transform. Where once there were cold, unfeeling automatons, now stood beings of living light. The Darax's harsh angles softened, their weapons morphing into appendages better suited for creation than destruction. Their red sensor lights faded, replaced by glowing orbs reminiscent of eyes filled with newfound awareness. As the transformation completed, silence fell over the clearing. The newly transformed beings regarded Raiden, Naira, and Lyra with what could only be described as wonder. One of them stepped forward, its voice a harmonious blend of organic and synthetic tones. "We remember," it said. "We were lost, consumed by fear. You have brought us back into the light." The ethereal being's voice resonated once more. "Balance is restored. The children of fear have been reborn as children of light. Ethereum's future is once again bright." As the implications of their actions sank in, Raiden turned to Naira and Lyra. The small family embraced, tears of joy and relief flowing freely. They had not only saved themselves, but had brought about a new era of peace for Ethereum. In the days that followed, Raiden worked alongside the Velari and the transformed Darax to rebuild their world. The knowledge and skills he brought from his explorations of other planets proved invaluable in this process of restoration and growth. Naira, recognized as a leader among her people, spearheaded efforts to re-establish Velari civilization, integrating the newly transformed beings into their society. Lyra, her innate connection to Ethereum's energy stronger than ever, became a bridge between the old ways and the new. As for Raiden, he found himself at a crossroads. His ship, long since repaired, offered him the opportunity to return to his life of exploration. Yet as he stood on the precipice of this decision, he realized that his heart had found a new home. In Naira's luminous eyes, he saw a future filled with purpose and belonging. In Lyra's infectious enthusiasm, he recognized the wonder that had first driven him to explore the stars. And in Ethereum itself, with its bioluminescent forests and newly harmonious inhabitants, he discovered a world that still held countless mysteries to unravel. With a smile, Raiden made his choice. He would stay, continuing to bridge the gap between his human experience and the wonders of Ethereum. In doing so, he embraced a new adventure, one of growth, connection, and the endless possibilities that arise when different worlds come together in understanding and peace. As the twin suns of Ethereum set on another day, Raiden stood with Naira and Lyra at the edge of a cliff overlooking the vast glowing forest. The transformed Darax moved among the trees below, their light mingling with the natural bioluminescence of the world. "What happens now?" Lyra asked, her young voice filled with curiosity about the future. Raiden exchanged a warm glance with Naira before responding. "Now we build, we learn, we grow together." And as night fell over Ethereum, the world glowed brighter than ever before, a beacon of hope and harmony shining out into the cosmic dark.